And I showed up and I said, knock, knock, remember me? Definitely my law school years, definitely my college years, and most likely my high school years, saying, I will never ever do what my father does. Time I was 40 years old, I lost 10 friends to horrible tragedies.
Welcome to Celebrating Justice, presented by the Trial Lawyers Journal and Cloudlex, the next-gen legal cloud platform built exclusively for personal injury law. Get inspired by the nation's top trial lawyers and share in the stories that shape our pursuit of justice. Follow the podcast and join our community at triallawyersjournal.com. Now here's your host, editor of TLJ and VP of Marketing at Cloudlex, Chad Sands.
Welcome back, friends, to Celebrating Justice. In this episode, we welcome Manhattan-based trial lawyer Justin Blitz. A native New Yorker, Justin has seen his share of pain and loss, both personally and through the eyes of his clients. Despite thinking he would never follow in the footsteps of his father, 22 years and over 100 verdicts later, he now does exactly that, delivers justice for the injured. To get to the stories, I asked him, why did you want to become a trial lawyer?
When I was in law school, I was in the music business and I was working for a record label, and I was 1,000% sure that I was going to pursue a career in law based in the music industry. And I was working for Chris Blackwell, who started Island Records, Bob Marley and U2, and he had started a new record label. It sort of dawned on me, the music industry as an attorney really is boring. And you've got these big names on these contracts, but at the end of the day, they are just contracts. My mother always told me that my best talent resided in talking, using my powers of persuasion. So my father and my uncle, they were sort of the pioneers in the state of New York doing medical malpractice cases. They were literally like the first guys to start bringing these cases. And I took the bar exam. And I said to my father, I said, why don't you give me a shot over at your law firm? And he was like, well, I thought you were in the music business. What's all that about? I'm like, I know, but give me a shot. And besides my uncle, he had 4 other partners. And the other partners were like, that is a horrible idea. I don't want him here. Basically, my father was like, too bad. We're going to give him a shot. They gave me... It was pretty much a closet next to this air conditioning constantly. It was just brutal. The managing attorney, and he says, you're trying this case in 3 weeks. Nobody wants to try it. Good luck. With like this nasty smirk on his face. And I was like, wow, okay. I don't even know the first thing about trying a case. So it was a negligent security case, and we brought a lawsuit against the owner of the building. And I tried the case, still remember the judge, who's now an appellate division judge. And I remember her during the trial pulling me into her chambers and saying, you don't know what the heck you are doing here. And I said, you are right, Judge. This is my first trial. Don't tell anyone. And the jury on that trial gave me a $3.95 million verdict. That was when I was like, I got the bug, so to speak. I was like, wow, I'm pretty good at this. I think I'm going to stick around here. Mind you, I had spent definitely my law school years, definitely my college years, and most likely my high school years, saying, I will never, ever do what my father does. And here I am talking to you 22 years later with over 100 verdicts under my belt. That's the story of me becoming a trial attorney.
Did you love music? Like, were you a musician in high school? Like, what?
I love music. I still love music. I was throwing these parties in Manhattan at Joe's Pub down on Lafayette Street, where I was booking bands. I was, I guess, like a little club promoter in high school, and this was sort of the continuation of that. It was amazing. I booked great bands like The Strokes and All American Rejects and New York City grimy type bands that were trying to get big, and I was booking them, and then I was going to law school, and then I was working in the legal division of, it's called Palm Pictures, Chris Blackwell's record label. So it all sort of jived into where I thought I was going to go. Now I just listen to music while I'm working on my trials.
And the realization that you didn't want to be a contract attorney.
Yeah, I was like, dude, this sucks. Literally, I was like, okay, it's cool that it says Bob Marley Publishing on the front of the contract, but it's just contracts. I mean, I wasn't in A&R, I wasn't booking the bands, and then in the music business, then eventually just became dealing with copyright and
Napster.
Napster, exactly. It was right around the time of Napster. They were trying, they being the record labels, were trying to figure out how they were going to stay profitable in a world of Napster.
I heard someone bought Napster recently.
I mean, I remember Napster so well. I was like, this is incredible.
I mean, that was kind of at the birth of social media, but more MySpace. You know what I mean? Instagram, TikTok wasn't there. Streaming music wasn't there. The labels were desperately trying to hold on to their CD sales. And now it's completely turned around.
And the elevation from Napster to like Spotify is just mind-boggling to me.
It's almost like if you stayed a contract attorney compared to being a trial lawyer.
Totally. And who knows where my world would have ended up. I most likely would not have had my own law firm as I do now. And that's also a pretty cool story as to what caused me to leave my father's office.
So you did leave your father's firm. Was it the partners that you got sick of, or did you have to just go out on your own to prove yourself?
What happened was, after a couple of years, I saw that one of the younger partners was taking money, and I knew it. And the older partners didn't believe me. He'd been there a long time, and I was like this new guy, and I knew it, and I couldn't stay there and watch it. So I convinced my dad, who started getting in sort of bad health, to come with me, and I was going to start my own law firm. There were two guys, one who used to work for my dad, who approached me and said, listen, we're starting a law firm. Why don't you be the third here? We met for 7 months at a little bar in Tribeca, planning our new law firm and planning our escape route. And I took a loan and had no cases and had my father tag along. But with this guy who was taking this money, my father's mental health started really deteriorating rapidly. I sued the dude, and I went through an entire arbitration against him. I was the attorney. I represented my father on it. I covered the cost of it, which was back then was like a huge amount of money for me. Went on for about 1.5 years, and I won. After 34 years, 9 months after I left the firm, my father's firm dissolved. This guy who took the money, I got a judgment against him. He was taking from my father, and he pled poverty, but he had one case. He had one case that my father had started in the 80s. It was the oldest case in Bronx County of New York. It had gone through 3 different mayors, and it was a landfill case against the city of New York, where we represented, it was about 35 kids who lived within the landfill area, and they had gotten leukemia from the landfill permeating into the water in the area. And this guy who took the money, he took that case. And I had this judgment against him for my father's money that he was owed. And I just sat and waited. And little did I know I was going to wait 14 years. So my father passes away. I start this new firm. I then end up going out on my own without these other 2 guys. Fast forward 14 years. My wife calls me on my way to work And she's like, hey, I just heard on New York One that the city of New York settles a landfill case for $32 million. I'm like, honey, let me call you back. I'd been sitting there waiting with this judgment to get against this guy. And after 14 years, we eventually got paid. And I showed up and I said, knock, knock. Remember me? Remember this judgment? By then, my father had passed away. My uncle had passed away. So I took that money that we got and I divvied it up to all my dad's kids, the grandkids, my uncle's kids, and eventually justice was done. Delayed, but done. That was the real closure, so to speak, on passing of my dad and the ability to sort of put that chapter of my life behind me and move on. And it was the same guy who, first Christmas party when I was at my father's firm back in 03, 04, whatever it was, he punched me in the face at the Christmas party in front of all the judges in New York. He drank too much and he didn't want me to be around. And that's really what got me to start my own law firm.
Well, it sounds like you didn't have your typical journey to hanging your own shingle or starting your own law firm. That's for sure.
It was typical in the sense of starting my own law firm and putting out my own shingle in that we didn't have any money. We didn't have any cases. And we really just grinded for years to get to the point where I'm at now. I had, of course, some things that happened to you that help you along the way. The first 5 years after I started my practice, there was a lawyer in Queens, and he had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases. They weren't the best cases, but he asked me to try them. And this was back when there were one particular judge in Queens County. He was sort of a madman, and he'd have you try cases one after another after another. I mean, there would be times where I was picking a jury on the second floor. I was giving a closing argument on another case in the third floor, and I was then cross-examining someone on a third trial in the afternoon. All three separate trials happening at the same time. And then I'd finish, and he'd send me out again, and he'd send me out again, and I took a ton of verdicts. I look back at that time, and I'm so grateful for it. Of course, you have some lucky things happen. I remember maybe 6-7 months into my new practice, I'm in debt and we don't have any cases, nothing upcoming. And
stressing probably like crazy.
And I'm like, how am I going to pay my rent and to get married and all this stuff, And I get this call, right, from one of the big firms in the city. And they're like, hey, you sent us a Bausch and Lomb case. And I was like, oh, I didn't even have any records of it. I'm like, oh, okay, great. I'm like, what's going on? Yeah, he's on the other line. He's like, well, we settled the case. We have a referral check for you. And he goes, $208,000. And I fell off my chair. He's like, so we're going to mail it to you. And I'm like, where's your office?
I'll come pick it up.
Yeah. And I remember it was raining and I'm sitting on staring at the check and I never had that much money in my life. And so you have things like that will help you get going. But I'm a big believer of if you really learn your trade and you treat people well and you are honest and you work hard, things are going to come to you. Well, there's no doubt about that.
And you don't punch people in the face at Christmas parties.
You don't punch people in the face in Christmas parties. You don't steal from old lawyers who are starting to lose their marbles and have trained from some of the best guys in the country. I saw just now in the Trial Lawyers Journal, in the last page is the advertisement for the Jerry Spence College. Been there, trained there.
You went to Thunderhead Ranch?
I did. I went to Thunderhead Ranch. I was recently thinking I'm probably due for a renewal visit. It's probably been about 10 years, but I loved it. And I incorporate still to this day the things that I learned there. That's a lot about trying cases by human and identifying people's stories and brutal honesty with things and the psychoanalytical principles that you learn there, which you incorporate into your work as a trial attorney, are still things that I do to this day. And then I take, of course, from the other greats, the Balls and the Keenans, and studied under them, and Rick Friedman's, and You name it. If there's a guy who knows what they're talking about in this world, I tell my kids all the time, I'm still learning. There's no doubt about it. And the second you think you know it all is the second that you're done. There's always an opportunity to learn more and more.
For sure. Jerry Spence is a big inspiration. And actually, the second question I ask everybody, I feel, is a very Jerry Spence style question. How do you stand out? What makes you unique as a trial lawyer?
That's always a good question, especially when you're in a market like New York City. I'm born and bred Manhattan. I've lived here my whole life. I also, when I was younger, at the time I was 40 years old, I lost 10 friends.
Wow.
To horrible tragedies. Some that I was involved in, but all of them were very close. I'm talking my best friends in the world, dealing with those things. And it was at one point when I was in high school, it was almost every year. One I lost, then I lost two the following year, then one the next year after that, then one the next year after that, next year after that. Suffering through something like that alters one's course of life, and there's a lot of bad that comes with it, and I miss my friends every day. But there's also some good that you can take from horrible experiences like that. So I have a keen understanding of A, what's important, B, how to deal with grief, how to channel those emotions into a positive way, i.e., fighting ferociously for people who have suffered loss and tragedy. And then you add that in with my real good sense, street sense, just growing up in this city. And to this day, I can say this, where I had friends that were some of the poorest and some of the richest and everything in between. And then there's the ability, which is also a skill that needs to be learned, which is the ability to be vulnerable, the ability to be embarrassed, the ability to be brutally honest, which goes hand in hand with being vulnerable and being embarrassed. And that's where I stand out, because I just don't think that the average, very talented, very smart, very experienced attorney doing what I do had those life experiences that will take you to the level that I believe and I know that I'm at.
It's almost as if the struggles of the city in Manhattan and all these characteristics of you, kind of like it's a melting pot. It's almost a reflection of the city itself.
Very much so. I'm like the epitome of a New Yorker, and I don't take something like that for granted. This is the only place I've ever lived. I have a keen sense of the city. The city is in my blood. I think back to like before my time, but Studio 54, right? Even in the early 90s, like the nightclubs, what made the city so great, which it's not like this anymore. Now you got these private clubs and you need to be a member, and go back to 54 where you can have Andy Warhol getting into a club, and then the next guy who's getting in is just some like street dude who's got some good vibes on and some cool clothes, and he's getting in and he's sitting there right next to Warhol. To me, that's the city. It's not private clubs just for the rich. That's what made the city so great. And so to this day, when I hire interns or I hire young attorneys, I want kids who went to Brooklyn Law School. I want kids who went to Cardozo Law School. It's the type of business where you got to grind. And I guess at the end of the day, I love what I do. I really enjoy it. And that's half the battle.
You talked about a little bit about your results and the verdicts. And this question isn't necessarily about the verdict, but could you share a story about a case that had a significant impact on you?
I've had so many cases that have had such a significant impact on me. To talk about a case that I've never have answered the question that way, about this case. And it involved a young lady. She was a really nice young girl. She was so quiet. And she was in a psychiatric ward. And she was in a psychiatric ward. She had been very abused as a young girl. And I guess your mind can only take so much. And she ended up in this psychiatric ward. And she came to me through her father, who was a newsstand guy. He had a little kiosk. He told me that his daughter had been raped in the psychiatric home. He had told me that there were 4 or 5 lawyers who didn't believe her and wouldn't take the case. And the value is not a lot, begging me to take the case. And I remember when I got the case, I was very skeptical, wasn't sure I wanted it. I met her in the ward, couldn't get anything out of her. And I went back. We had a breakthrough moment, and she told me in detail what happened. I took the case. I successfully litigated the case. We won the case. She then took that money. She left Queens where she was. She got proper care. She got on medication. She checked in with me about a year ago. She called me out of the blue, and she was telling me how her mental illness is under control, and she got married, and she became a mother, and she lives down south. And she said to me, she's like, what happened with us was the precipice for her to change her life. And she said to me, if you didn't take my case, I know for sure I would not be alive right now, or I would still be sitting in that psychiatric ward in Queens. You do a lot of cases through the years like I do, and it wasn't millions and millions of dollars. I actually didn't even think much about it until she called me and gave me this update on her life. I've thought a lot about her recently, actually. It was more meaningful to me than I guess I ever thought. It reinforces the notion in my mind that doing what I do has a true, significant, real effect on people's lives.
Little parallels with, I guess, how long you had to wait for that result or the verdict to come in about that partner who was stealing from your dad, and how that took over a decade. And maybe this case took a decade or many years to kind of come full circle.
There's no doubt about it. Our system in many respects is partially broken in that it just takes years and years and years for us to litigate these cases. As I tell my clients all the time, why is it taking so long? And I'm at the mercy of the courts, and there's just only so many judges, and there's thousands and thousands of cases. Eventually, they all come to a head. And eventually, most of the time, almost all the time, I'm successful achieving justice for these people who have been waiting for so long. And I can relate to that. You asked me earlier what makes me stand out, and I gave you all these answers of my environment and the tragedies I suffered. I also was in some serious accidents when I was younger where I really injured myself, and one might make the argument that I shouldn't even be here today. In 1999, I was in a horrible motorcycle accident, and I broke over 30 bones in my body, and things like that happening to me also adds to the gratification that I have for my clients when I get good results.
At CloudLex, we understand the unique demands and opportunities that personal injury law firms face every day. That's why we've built a comprehensive platform designed exclusively for personal injury law. Our seamless case management, AI engine, litigation support, and record retrieval solutions empower you at every stage, from intake through settlement and beyond, helping you stay productive, organized, and focused on achieving successful outcomes for your clients. Explore what's possible at cloudlex.com. Now here is this episode's closing argument.
I was asked by a colleague to take a case for trial. It was a products liability case against, we've all heard of them. They're the largest manufacturer of construction equipment in the world. And you see their cats all over the streets. And my colleague said to me, listen, it's coming up for trial. I can't find somebody to try the case. the man was using the construction equipment. It was a big monster machine. He gets off the machine, turns it off, and the machine moved while it was turned off. And it crushed this man's legs against the foundation of the home. Devastating, life-changing injuries. 7-8 surgeries. Really bad stuff. But they couldn't figure out why this machine that was turned off moved. They had maybe 300,000 records that I'm not sure anybody had even looked at, which they had gotten in discovery from the construction company defendants. And he's like, listen, it's on for trial in about 4 or 5 weeks. Would you get involved? They said to me, there's an expert. He's in Illinois. He's 80 years old. That's all we got. And he doesn't know why it moved. I got on an airplane and I flew to Illinois. He was an engineer. And I showed up at his house and I said, I'm not leaving here until we figure out why this machine moved. And I figured I might spend a day, maybe 2 days. I was on the 3rd day and we still didn't have a clue. Then it went to the 4th day, and it went to the 5th day. When we discovered, and this was after digging through thousands and thousands of pages of records, that there was a little piece of the parking brake system of this machine. It was called the solenoid valve. And the solenoid valve on this particular model, in layman's terms, it was shorting. And it was causing the machine to move when it was not turned on. And then we figured out that the company knew about this valve not working. And we started digging and digging and digging, and we found other instances where the machine had moved and no one could figure out why, and people were injured. And then we found a memo that was internally written by the manufacturer where they basically said, yes, we know that this solenoid valve is broken, it's defective, it was designed defectively, but it would take a recall of thousands and thousands of machines that are out there in the world. And in layman's terms, it was decided by the company that they would rather just pay out on lawsuits. It would cost them too much money to recall this machine. So the trial starts, and it's me on one side of the table, and there's about 14 attorneys on the other side of the table. And there was no offer. And the trial begins, and 1 week goes by, and 2nd week goes by, 3rd week goes by. And on that 3rd week, they flew down the chief engineer of the entire company. He has about 350 engineers who work under him. And I had subpoenaed him and I put him on the stand. And I kept him on the stand for 2 days. He was brilliant, there's no doubt about it. But I was ready for him. And I proved through his cross-examination that this valve, A, was designed defectively, and B, they knew about it. And then on the 4th day of his testimony, I walked into the courthouse and we resolved the case for about $10 million after about 7 years without any dollar being offered. Monetarily, it was a great result, but it was such a microcosm of what makes being a trial attorney such a rewarding, wonderful career. And there's so many core values that are in me that I take from that trial and that story of fighting the good fight and being the underdog and staying persistent and figuring out what the heck is going on here, who's responsible and why, and just giving it every sense of my fibers and my bones and body to this case to get this man justice. A gentleman, a story that I will never forget, and has a lot of examples of how I strive to be, not only as an attorney, but as a person.
That was trial lawyer Justin Blitz. Thanks for sharing your stories. To learn more about Justin and his firm, visit their website, blitzlawgroup.com. All right, I'm Chad Sands. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
You've been listening to Celebrating Justice, presented by CloudLex and the Trial Lawyers Journal. Remember, the stories don't end here. Visit triallawyersjournal.com to become part of our community and keep the conversation going. And for a deeper dive into the tools that empower personal injury law firms, visit cloudlex.com/TLJ to learn more.